Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in the New River Valley of Virginia. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And I'm doing a video post on this on my new Substack, which you can find. It's Hermetic Astrology on Substack. There's a link there on my homepage. So I wanted to talk to y'all today because it's a very important day in the cycle of Mercury. Around 5 p.m. today, Eastern Time, Mercury will be directly intersecting the ecliptic plane, which is essentially the plane of the Earth, the orbit of the Earth around the sun. We see it as the path of the sun through the sky. Typically, we think of the ecliptic plane as the path of the sun through the sky, but of course, we know that's an illusion, that the Earth orbits around the sun. And this is a really important because if you think about it for a second, first of all, two things, one that is that challenges an almost universal assumption that I think astrologers make. Number one, Mercury is on directly on the ecliptic plane today, specifically for, you know, the latter part of today, because Mercury moves very fast. Um, And that implies that at other times he's not. In fact, most of the time, planets are not on the ecliptic plane. And that's because planets have their own orbits with respect to the sun. And these orbits intersect with the Earth's orbit. And these places, we call them nodes. I'm going to talk a lot more. I'm going to bring up some slides and talk to y'all a lot more about this because I think it's something that's very neglected and yet extremely important for modern astrologers to understand. Um, but this idea that Mercury is interacting with the plane of the Earth, it's almost like, so if a planet is not on the ecliptic, but let's say it's in a particular sign, well, it's affecting a zone of the ecliptic. It's interacting with a zone of the ecliptic, but from a distance. Whereas when Mercury intersects the ecliptic, it's a much more direct interaction. It's almost like the difference between, let's say, if I have a headache or something and I want to take a pill to you know, to calm my headache down or whatever, versus if you get like an injection, that injection is going to go is going it's going to bypass the gut and it's going to be more directly available to your bloodstream. So this idea of Mercury crossing the ecliptic is like an injection of mercurial consciousness into the Earth consciousness. It's quite a dramatic difference from Mercury just going through a sign, or even I would say it's similar to a station in the terms of the potency of the energy. There's a potency that would be similar to what we experience when a planet is stationary, because when a planet is stationary, it's acting more like a fixed star. Um, so I thought it was a great time to bring out some of the talking points from one of my favorite subjects, and that is has to do with what we call the latitude cycle. Um, this movement of Mercury north and south with regards to the ecliptic, this is called celestial latitude. Along the ecliptic plane, east and west, we call this longitude. So hang on, I'm going to crank up my slideshow and we'll get going here. So this is material that I've been presenting since at least 2017. I think the first time I presented it publicly was at the NCGR National Conference. That was the second one they did in my time in Baltimore. Um, and I had a couple articles published in Mountain Astrologer and in Geocosmic Journal that year on this same topic. And I say tongue in cheek, a revolutionary view of planetary motion because it is actually revolutionary, unfortunately, um, vis-a-vis what's become like the sort of standard in modern times. But it's really like a renaissance, actually, of the way that astrologers once understood planetary motion, as we're going to see. So I'm not introducing anything new here, actually. Well, there is I have introduced some new, as far as I know, some stuff that no one else has talked about before, but I'll differentiate that from what we've known for a very long time as we go along. So I always like to put on my Morpheus mask. And say, what if I told you that all those pictures you've seen of retrograde motion are a lie? Those, I call them the squished paperclip, where they say, oh, Mercury's going to go here and then here and then here. And it's like a squished S. It's like a paperclip. That's not what Mercury's motion looks like at all. No planet ever looks like that. And so that's so, yeah, being a little dramatic that it's a lie. It's not a lie, it's just not accurate. Um, but it's more fun to meme it up, so good old Morpheus. So the idea here is that the point of view that you assume, and I talk to people all the time about this, like, as a photographer, I have many different lenses that I can attach to my camera. And depending on the kind of view, the kind of photograph that I'm trying to capture, I'm going to attach a very different lens for that particular purpose. That's what we get astrologers who argue back and forth about the different views, and it's kind of like arguing about, you know, what's the best lens. There's no one best lens for everything. There are some lenses that are really good for a lot of things, but there's no one best lens for everything. If I want to take landscape, I'm pretty much going to have to do something that is in the wider than normal angle of view. The normal angle of view is roughly about 50 millimeter in terms of camera lenses. I'm going to need to get a little bit wider than that. My smallest telephoto is about 40, and I do all right with that. It's a really versatile lens. It's a little pancake lens. I love that lens, but it's definitely not the only lens I'm ever going to use. Similarly, we have a lot of tools as astrologers, and depending on which tool we're engaging with, we're going to see things differently. And that's kind of the point. But if you're not aware of that, and you think, you know, like for instance, I would put most astrologers over here in the yellow camp with that circle. They think this circle that we draw on the paper, that's the sky. Dude, that's not the sky. I'm here to tell you. Okay. You don't see a circle anywhere in the sky. You see half of it, but you don't see that circle. Um, and then we get, people over here on the other camp talking about, whatever, politics, we get red and blue, blah, blah, blah. It depends on where you're looking at things from, what you see. And you have to stop looking at it from here and move over here and go, oh, wow, from over here, it does look like a square. Yeah, it kind of does. Um, and so there's a lot of talk of exploding the binary. People talk, but I mean, in terms of politics, we have such a binary experience. I'm really tired of people trying to put me in one or other of those binaries because I don't really subscribe to either one of them. And we do the same thing with direct motion versus retrograde motion. Speaking of politics, by the way, somebody recently, somebody I care about, tried to put me in a certain camp saying that I was promoting a certain narrative or I don't even know. But I took a test recently and it actually put me in the libertarian camp, which is a whole nother axis. You've got progressive and conservative, and then you've got um, libertarian versus authoritarian. So libertarians think that government basically is a necessary evil. And because it's a necessary evil, the least amount that gets the job done is the right amount. Whereas other people think, oh, just let the government do everything. That generally leads to authoritarian type situations. Like a lot of people would consider China a situation like that, where the government's like watching your every move and stuff like that. Um, so it's important to understand there's different um, axes, even in the political arena. So anybody who's trying to put me over here in this camp, that's a straw man. I don't identify with that. So this this is again a little bit of hyperbole, but not really that much. You get these oh, Mercury's in the shadow of the retrograde, and I'm playing up on that, but it's only just a little, you know. Mercury is in the shadow. Don't sign anything. Don't buy anything. Don't do anything until it's. And here's the thing about that. If you actually look at it and you include the so-called shadows, because I think they're made up. I don't they don't actually exist. Um, but if you add the time that Mercury's in the retrograde proper and you add these so-called shadows on, that's half your life that you're going to be avoiding reality. I can't live like that, you know? And so for a long time, I've been trying to talk to people about another way, which I happen to think is a better way. Um, it's really, really important to understand this idea of putting different lenses on. When the lens that most of us use when we look at a round horoscope wheel, that actually originated that idea of this idealized year. The Egyptians had an idealized year of 360 days. The Babylonians had an idealized tropical calendar system that they used for like administrative purposes. Their astronomy was much more, and astrology, which were the same thing back then, were much more based in the horizon and the stars and stuff. But they did have like this, basically, it was like the neo-pagan wheel of the year with the four cardinal points and the cross quarter points. They did have that, and then that was taken by the Greeks, and the elements were added and the modalities and this tropical zodiac wheel that we have that is essentially an agricultural calendar. This was taken by the Greeks and made into what we know today. But what you have to understand about that is the Babylonians were super dedicated observers of the sky. They for 30 generations, my estimate's about 30 generations, they had a particular caste of society, a priestly caste. Their whole life was dedicated to walking up the steps of the temple they called ziggurat, walking up the steps of the temple, observing and recording in order to understand the movement of these wandering stars, these planets, before they were able to create ephemerides, which is you have to have ephemerides in order to create this round chart. You have to know where stuff's going to be. So, so this observational astrology is based on the horizon, which again, you only see half of the ecliptic in the sky at any moment in time. You don't see a circle. This view of the circle is like a view from Mount Olympus, essentially. It's like you have to be to take a radically different point of view in order to see that. And so there's a radically different point of view. And in assuming that radically different point of view, it flattens the other dimension. This latitudinal dimension gets flattened, you know? and we don't see it, and we've pretty well forgotten about it. So this is a sort of diagram of what the ecliptic really is, which is a band of sky. It's not a line per se. The ecliptic plane is not even a plane. It's sort of a band of sky. And so it has depth, and the planets move within this band up and down across the exact middle, what we might call the sort of, line of the ecliptic, or uh, the technical terms eluding me, but the planets move up and down in a band around the ecliptic plane, essentially. And so when we're looking at it from the side, we can see this movement of the planets. But if we're looking at it from point of view of a horoscope wheel, we're actually looking at it from the north pole of the ecliptic. We have to go to the north pole of the ecliptic to see a round horoscope wheel, which is basically in the constellation Draco. So we're either on Mount Olympus or we're in the constellation Draco, and we're looking down. So we're looking from something, basically a disembodied view, looking down in order to see this. So this is what we often, oh, it's going to go around, it's going to whoop, 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 and it's going to go around and whoop, 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 and go around and whoop, whoop, whoop. Yeah, this is not a lie per se, but it's not astronomic. It's astronomically incomplete for sure. It's a one-dimensional view. And that's fine as long as we remember that it's a one-dimensional view and we don't think like this is the complete and total reality, because it's not. And if this is all we have, we would never know that Mercury is intersecting the ecliptic plane, because it's kind of assumed all of this is the ecliptic, and so it's kind of always on the ecliptic, but it's not. It's definitively not. Here's that squish dash that I talk about. These now it's a useful in terms of, well, okay, yeah, well, here the station's here and it goes through this, and then it goes retrograde, and then it goes back. Okay, fine. Again, it's not a lie in as much as it's just a very limited set of data. And astronomically speaking, the path of no planet ever cuts a path in the sky that looks remotely like that. So again, point of view produces perception. If we move our point of view, we're going to get a different picture. So let's move our point of view a little bit. And instead of this top-down point of view that most astrologers assume is the only point of view, because it's the only point of view since, the Greeks started horoscopic astrology. And we take back to like a horizontal view, or we just look at the ecliptic from the side on, right? We take essentially a two-dimensional view instead of a one-dimensional view. What we'll see is that the ecliptic is a band of sky. It's about 18 degrees, about 9 degrees either side. So that's a lot of room for them to move about. And that planets constantly move north and south as they move east and west. Um, Planets are hardly ever directly on the ecliptic, and they each have their own unique band. So this is a diagram. This sort of a reproduction of, you can find it in the book on the planetary spheres by Avalar and Helena Avalar and her partner. A really great book, by the way. This is sort of my reproduction of that. But you can see here, like Venus has a very wide relationship with the ecliptic. Now, why is that? Why is her relationship the widest? Well, she's the closest. Think about it. If we're talking and we're roughly, shoulder, we're like, what do you call that? At arm's length, which is a normal distance for people or having a conversation, whatever. and all of a sudden I stand up on a box, right, on a milk crate. You're gonna have to look up to see there's gonna be a big difference in the relative positioning of us. So, so that's like the Venus case. Venus is the closest planet, and when she strays from the ecliptic plane, it magnifies because of her closeness, right? Whereas if we look at like Jupiter, there's not a lot of, well, Jupiter's a lot farther. So if I go to the back of the room and stand on that same milk crate, it's not going to feel like that much difference because I'm a lot farther away, you see? So, and by the way, Venus right now is in a loop. There's only one loop out of all of the retrogrades, out of the five retrogrades, there's only one that where she reaches this maximum distance, and it's the one we're in right now. And because of this, it's actually possible to see if you go far enough north. I think Adam Gainsbourg, my Sky Astrology conference partner, he only had to go as far north as New Hampshire, which I don't know. I'm thinking, I can't remember what the latitude is up there. Getting above 40 anyway. Um, Down here in Southern Virginia, I'm in the mid 30s. So you have to go a little farther north. And you can see Venus as evening star one day and morning star the next day. There's literally no time where Venus is invisible during the retrograde. And that's really remarkable because most of the time when the interior planets are retrograde, they disappear for a time, and that's kind of a notable feature of their retrogrades. So once we understand this other lens, and we know that there's a band of sky and that planets travel within this band, we begin to see that, oh wow, this idea of the so-called shadow of the retrograde, where it comes from, it's a legitimate attempt at for astrologers to explain. I'm assuming that it came from a legitimate attempt at astrologers, you know, let's say an astrologer in the 1980s, which is I think where this theory comes from of the so-called shadow. You know, their clients are calling them up. Oh my God, is Mercury ret? I thought you told me Mercury doesn't go retrograde until what? Is it things are already crazy? What's going on? And they started going, man, like the things can change dramatically just before the retrograde and just after. So we need something to explain this. Okay, totally legitimate. In fact, that's like one of the most legitimate things that a counseling astrologer can do is try to make the astrology match the client's experience. But unfortunately, it's just not astronomically true. What we find is that the astronomy itself offers us, without a need for pasting any kind of shadows, if you look before and after the retrograde, planets make their most dramatic changes in north and south and east and west. And so it's no wonder that people experience vertigo and and report dramatic changes happening in their lives because the planets are changing oftentimes. And that's exactly what's happening right now with Mercury. It's crossing the ecliptic plane, it's going up, and then it's going to do a whew down a little bit later. And now this is something that I won't say I discovered. Because again, I can't say for sure if anybody else ever, I gotta assume that they knew this, but I don't know of any place where it was actually, you know, recorded. They certainly knew about the nodes and, and they knew that, that planets, um, cross the ecliptic plane, but the shape of the loops, and I mean, I spent so much time. Adam was again the one who turned me on to these. He's like, look at these crazy shapes what the hell do you think of this? And of course, me being a Virgo, like you show me, so I cannot unsee it. And I was like, okay, I've God, and I spent so much time like drawing. I drew all of them, and I finally thought I had it figured out, and I was like, okay, typical like combined Saturn with Virgo. I got Sun conjunct Saturn. Okay, let me add another 100 years and make sure I got it right. And then they start changing. Long story short, what I found out is that the shape of the loop depends on the location of the retrograde vis-a-vis the nodes of that planet, the places where the planet intersects the ecliptic. And these are in Scorpio and Taurus for Mercury. And by the way, I won't say almost every time, but there are times when people want to challenge me on this. I don't know why, but there's some bad information. Something got like what do you call it, dyslexically reversed at some point in time. Some publication had these nodes of Mercury reversed. I'm going to show you briefly, just so you know. NASA agrees with me, okay? All right, so let me just show you here. If you go to the NASA's website when they're talking about the transits of Mercury, which happen in these at these nodal points, like literally Mercury is crossing the ecliptic plane, which means it crosses the face of the sun, right? So they're saying that the May transits, which would be Taurus, are the descending node, and the November transits are the ascending node. And you can find maps where they'll literally show you that Mercury is crossing the sun, and you can see it goes from here and it goes up. Okay, so I've done the homework. I know this is correct. So there's always somebody out there who wants to challenge me about this, and I just trust me. I've done the homework. You can double check it if you want. That's fine. But this is definitely correct. And we know it's correct because why? Where is Mercury making the retrograde now? Just before Taurus and between Aries and Pisces. So it should look like this. According to this model, it should look like this. Well, lo and behold, looky there. See that? See this shape? That's exactly the shape that Mercury's making. It's making, and look, from the north node, as we go from Scorpio to Taurus, it's crossing the north node. It's going to make loops that take it into north latitude. Okay, if the nodes were reversed, this would be a south latitude loop, you see? So this is the actual shape of the loop. So this is today as Mercury is crossing the ecliptic plane, and then it's going to go up and it's going to reach pretty high up above the ecliptic. And basically it's north and getting more north most of the so-called pre-retrograde shadow. Well, a planet north and getting more north in classical astrology was considered a kind of dignity. It's a positive, like things are moving up. So I would expect that whatever pre-retrograde experience of change we might feel would not be an unwelcome disruption. It might be somewhat of a welcome disruption. For instance, today I just exchanged some emails with Adam and my mentee Olga over in Spain, and I'm going to be going over there during the retrograde. And so yeah, we're kind of getting excited about seeing each other again and then having a series of teachings over there with my extended Venus family and so forth. So there's this movement up with Mercury, and then as the planet turns retrograde, it kind of stops going up, it starts going on, and then it starts going down, and then right before the retrograde, right before the direct station, the bottom kind of drops out. You see, the most dramatic part of this retrograde is right here in the first couple weeks of April, where the bottom kind of drops out and it goes down across the ecliptic really quickly. and then it kind of levels out, and it levels out long before it reaches this place of the so-called shadow, post-retrograde shadow. It levels out here late April, long before it gets past the point of the previous station. So this idea of so-called shadow may not be um, it may be experienced as somewhat positive in the pre-retrograde, and it might be quite volatile in the post-retrograde, and it might be something that we thought was true before the retrograde turns out to be not true, or not true the way we thought it was. You know, there's definitely that quality of tracking a story from before, during, and after the retrograde. Like I said, that's a legitimate thing that we should aim to do, because that's how people often experience these time periods. Um, but the idea that they're just going to be like uniform zones that we paste before and after, that's not true at all, because as you can see, the shapes of these are very different. And so in some of them, in these Z-shaped loops, it's pretty flat before, and then it's dramatically different during, and then it's pretty flat after. There might not be much shadow at all in those loops, so-called shadow, I should say. So the retrogrades are different. And when we look to the actual motion of Mercury, we might be able to actually tie into the events that are going on. So watch for events today. Usually you give like a 3-day window. Maybe there was something yesterday, today, maybe tomorrow. Oh, wow. Then this is well before we crossed the area of the following of the second station direct. So we're not even in the so-called shadow yet, but I think we are actually in a way, because Mercury is entering the north latitude, which is where most of the loop will happen. So, it's just the law of parsimony says that simpler theories are better. So if we're looking at Mercury's actual motion to describe um, the presence of pre and post retrograde experience of change, that's a simpler way to explain it than pasting these imaginary shadow zones on there. And we should definitely keep in mind that these crossings of the ecliptic will be important markers in that experience. And this, as I said, now this part about watching the nodes, we know that it was part of astrology going back at least as far as the Greeks, because the Arabic author of the Picatrix tells us so. He says the ancient Greek sages were accustomed to observe a planet watching until it was in its proper guzahar. This is a term, the Arabic term is jauza here, um, which basically means the planetary node. So I was astounded when I was going through the Picatrix line by line at one point, because I remembered reading something and I couldn't remember where, and so I was literally speed reading through it. And I was like, and I was like, wait a minute, did they just talk about planetary nodes? I was like, holy crap, they did. I thought I saw a putty tat. I did. So this is ancient. Now, whether or not they understood the shape of these loops vis-a-vis the nodes, I can't say. I've never heard anyone. The only person I ever heard talk about it was this cat named um, Hinza. I was over at Lee Lehman's house one time when I was still living in Nashville. I think she had like a piece of furniture or something, and she asked me to deliver it. I have a pickup truck. So I drove up there. She was up there by Mount Mitchell, and drove up there, and she gave me some dinner afterwards, and we're sitting around talking, and she goes, "Gary, I had this book. I think you might want to look at it." And I opened it up, started looking through it. She's talking about this guy who sounded like a really wild guy, sounded like my kind of guy. I think she met him when she was in Europe, apparently. And um, in the back, I saw the pictures of these loops, and I was like, "Holy crap! This is I've never seen anybody talk about this." Um, so, and 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 he, I'm not sure even he understood that the role that the nodes played in there. So that's something that um, that I may be the first to understand. I don't know, but it's I'm the only one that really that is talking about it currently. Now, if you just go, for instance, to ephemeris.com, right, you can get the data for this is about 5 p.m., right? February 27th, 2200 Universal Times, about 5 p.m. Eastern. Um, and you can see Mercury is at 0 degrees latitude, 0 minutes and 10 seconds. So it's just entered north, and it's just like a one sixth of a degree going north. Um, and so you can check on this stuff yourself with various sources like ephemeris.com, right? And you can look and see, like, for instance, look at Mars is 3 degrees. As I said, Venus is 6 degrees north of the ecliptic. Mars is 3 degrees. And because Mars is 3 degrees and it's already near a solstice point, that's why Mars is out of bounds, because Mars is already 3 degrees beyond the ecliptic, and it's near the place where the ecliptic is at its maximum distance from the equator. So, in declination terms, Mars is thus out of bounds, you see? So, that's what you need for a planet to be out of bounds. You need for a planet to be near the solstice points, which is where the distance between the equator and ecliptic is the maximum, 23 degrees, 26 minutes. And and then it's got to have some additional latitude going in the direction of the declination. It could be the other way. If Mars was in south latitude here, that would keep it in bounds, but it's not. It's in north latitude, and so it's out of bounds. So let's think about all this for a little minute. So planets are direct most of the time. And most of the time, when they're direct, the amount of north-south movement is minimal. They might be going slightly down or slightly up, but they're relatively parallel to the ecliptic. So if we define normal as planet moving along the ecliptic and or parallel to the ecliptic, relatively parallel, that's normal. And that's what planets do most of the time. Um, So they're more or less operating on cruise control, if you will. And so, we can kind of afford to kind of, okay, do, just going along normal, just another day, blah, 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 right? Well, retrograde motion is much more rare, and particularly in the case of Venus and Mars. It's a little more regular with Mercury, but it's definitely less often than direct motion. We have dramatic shifts in both north and south and east west. And this deviation away from the ecliptic represents, as well as the retrograde of deviation of going backwards, they both represent a challenge to the normal, to the ordinary and usual way of seeing or doing things. And so retrograde planets are basically seekers. Hey, what's over here? Hey, they're kind of, I don't know, ADD or something, oh, wow, they're a little distracted. Oh, wow, what's over here? They're not going along with the normal. And so any expectation of normality expectation is the mother of disappointment. If you expect things to be normal when a planet's not acting normal, chances are you're going to be disappointed. However, if you expect things to not be normal, you might have a happy adventure. Because you're already like, okay, I knew things weren't going to be normal. I built in a little bit of fudge factor, got a little bit of extra time. What the hell? Let's see what's over here. You see the difference instead of trying to avoid and control the retrograde experience. If you accept it and open up to it, it can be very different. So one way of thinking about this is Joseph Campbell, who, by the way, did not take the normal path of a scholar. He did not get a PhD, and he decided, you know what? I don't want to read someone else's book list. I want to read the books I want to read. And I'm just going to take some time and read all the books that I want to read. And that's how he became the person he is. Um, and he basically divided mythology into two kinds. He said there's basically two kinds of myths. One he called the way of the village. These are important because they actually lay out what a particular society considers normal. This is the way you do when you get married. This is the way you do when you're um, passing along the baton to the next generation, which is very different. For instance, in India, the father would go and live in the forest, apparently, or the different things um, at different times. And so there's this idea that the orthodoxy and the norms were described in these stories. So this is the way, what he called the way of the village. Um, And then there is what Campbell called the way of the forest adventure, which is a necessary departure from normal. And Campbell said, if you're on a path, it's not your path because somebody been there before. you know? And so this idea that you have to get lost in the weeds to find your path. Wow. I mean, think about that for a second. Most people spend a lot of emotional, psychic energy trying not to get lost, but maybe actually getting yourself lost and getting in the weeds with something is the way to find your own path. So this idea of breaking free from social dogmas of authority and tradition as a way of being initiated, of finding your own unique path in the mysteries and the magic of the special world. That is the way of the forest adventure. And I think that retrograde planets basically act like that. They go off the path. And as you can see from these beautiful maps. And now that alone is something that even though I've been talking about this, good grief, for like 8 years now, publicly, I don't know that I made any headway, honestly, because you don't hear very many, you still hear all this stuff about the shadow and all this other, what I consider nonsense. But let's assume we get that far and people are able to accept that and start to go, wow, okay, retrograde might be a forced adventure, like there might be an initiation. Wow, and which, by the way, your average person is probably a lot better equipped to do than most astrologers, because they don't have any previous preconceptions about it. I remember talking about this sort of thing, of the retrograde not necessarily being a bad thing, but maybe being an opportunity. I remember talking about it on my podcast, like way back, and at least a couple different times, like two different times, there were people who, for instance, a lot of people say Venus retrograde is coming up. A lot of people say, oh, it's a time when old lovers will come back into your life. It's like sort of the cliche of, and So now, is that necessarily a bad thing? Well, it depends on your current situation, I guess. But both of these people were able to hear me saying, hey, there might be, it might be actually a good time to go back and try something that didn't work before and try it again, because this time it might actually be able to work because you're in a period where that's what it's good for. It's good for going back and trying stuff again. And two different people who were in search of long lost family members were able to find them because of that message. And I mean, it was a profound experience for both of them. And I was so humbled and so like that's the kind of thing that keeps me going as an astrologer, to know that something I said made a difference in somebody's life. It's like, wow. That's kind of all you can ask for, you know? Um, so that alone is a huge um a huge thing. It can be really life altering potentially. It's not every time, but it can be. Um, and then if we get past that and we start to understand this, what I call the latitude cycle, if we start to understand, okay, there's this place where a planet crosses the ecliptic going up. That's what we call the North Node. There's a place where the planet crosses the ecliptic going down. That's what we call the South Node. In between, there's the what we call the North Bending and the South Bending. Now, if you read Dane Rudjar talking about this latitude cycle, he'll basically tell you that the nodes represent kind of like the equinox points in the wheel of the year. Like, so and that makes sense because what is the Aries equinox but the place where the sun crosses the equator going north? It's the north node of the sun, essentially. What is the Cancer solstice? It's the place where the sun is the furthest north of the equator. What is the Libra um, ingress? It's the place where the sun crosses the equator going south. What is the Capricorn solstice? The place where the sun is the furthest south of the equator. So it's a really apt metaphor. And what he's saying is that if we take the vegetation cycle of plants, we think about what are they doing in the spring and the summer? They're absorbing energy. They're absorbing solar energy. So there's this process of intake. There's this sort of, remember, the North Node in Vedic astrology is is hungry for new experience, right? It's taking in energy. And then after the south node, there's this release. What do plants do in the fall? They shed their leaves and they drop their seeds, right? And so we can begin to understand this latitude cycle and begin to understand the potentialities of the different retrogrades through this latitude cycle. So we can begin to understand, Mercury's in a northern loop, so there's something new that I need to take in, some new information that maybe challenges my old ways of thinking. There's new energy that's available to me. Um, I'm like a plant reaching out for the sun, right? I'm like, so there's, but I might need to depart from normal in order to find that source of that energy. Where I'm at right now, I might be in the shade of another thing. I might need to move over here a little bit to really get the sun to shine on me. Um, what have you, right? And what's interesting is that all three of the retrogrades that we're experiencing this year, the Mars retrograde, um, that just finished, the Venus retrograde that's coming next, and then the eventual Mercury retrograde, they're all three northern loops. So this is very interesting because if they weren't all the same, boy, that would be kind of difficult because you're going to be getting the message from one, oh, it's time to take in energy, and you might get the a message from the other one, no, 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 it's time to shed and release. that could be very, mixed messages that might be very difficult. But in fact, they're all three telling us, in fact, they're in these three different versions of the northern loops, is what's going on. Mars is in this one, Venus is in this one, and Mercury's in this one. So, but they're all in northern latitude loops. So there's this um, intake of new information, of new energy that's available to us through all three of these channels. And that's pretty remarkable. And the last thing I want to include here, I had on the podcast a little while back, Marlena Brimner, Sister Seven, I call her. um, she talks about in her book the cycle of the four seasons vis-a-vis the alchemical cycle. A lot of times I'll talk about the alchemical cycle in three steps: albedo, nigredo, albedo, rubedo. That's like the simplest form. The four-step form includes the cycle citrinatus. And this is actually, this four-step model is, of course, it fits perfectly with the four seasons. So, and look, what happens in the spring? If I look out back in my apple orchard, pretty soon I'm going to see white blossoms coming out of the trees. Like there's going to be this new burst of energy. And then what? They're going to leaf out and they're going to be absorbing the yellow energy of the sun, citrinatus. And then in the fall, if I'm lucky, if there's no drought and if there was no frost when the blossoms were, you know, um, then the fruit will be ripe and the fruit will fall from the trees and there'll be these red apples, rubedo. Okay, and then the leaves fall away, and there's this quiet time of winter, which we just went through. So there's this really obvious alchemical cycle with the wheel of the year that we can then begin to understand as Rudyard, mm, maybe less poetically. Rudyard's a little dense at times, or he was for me, anyways. But he's right. Like it's a perfect metaphor. The equinoxes and solstices for these points in the latitude cycle. I think he nailed it. And yeah, and so in these northern loops, there might be this more yang energy of needing these outer experiences of going on a quest or slaying a dragon or there might or just like feeling energized by something, like soaking in some new energy. Whereas in the South loops, we might actually, wintertime might be time to get quiet and be still and sort of do some healing, um, or release the need for activity and so forth, right? And that's typically what we get. Oh, retrograde means go within, blah, 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 right? Well, not all retrogrades are the same, though, you see. So, and then these Z-shaped loops where they're crossing the ecliptic, they would represent if we take like the metaphor of the hero's journey, we were talking about Campbell, there's the threshold of adventure where the hero leaves the ordinary world and enters the special world, and there's the threshold of return. So they're very different. On the one hand, the hero needs to answer the call and to leave ordinary behind and be to have the guts to say, I'm not going to cling to normal. I'm just going to dive into the weeds. I'm going to get lost. On the other hand, they need to bring back whatever they found while they were lost, and they need to bring it back and to normal. And here's the thing: they need to convince the people in normal life, hey, look at this beautiful thing I found. Isn't it great? And they need to show them the utility of this thing that they found. See, that's the thing that I think most people don't. It's one thing to just go on an adventure. It's another thing to receive some kind of enlightenment, some kind of new experience or knowledge or whatever. And it's another thing to be able to share that with people in a way that they can absorb it and to and integrate it. So there's a lot. There's a lot of differences. And this, so I mapped the monomyth or the hero's journey onto the Mars loops here. And you can see what's really wild is, okay, so if you take and you look at the Mars retrograde of 2018, so and you look at it, like late July is when Mars was opposite the sun, so it was like the middle of the retrograde. Look up July 2018 in Wikipedia. Just type 2018 into Wikipedia and then go down the events page, look at July. You know what you'll see? Scientists discovered glacial lakes on Mars. Where? At the South Pole. The deep southern loop of Mars. And this is literally showing up. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And then 2 years later, in September, during the retrograde loop, they confirmed this discovery, right? So it's really like crazy when you start seeing this kind of literal um, sort of experience of these ideas in play. And it's really exciting actually because that gives us even more of a lens to say, okay, well, so if 2018 was this kind of deep southern loop, so this was winter, right? And now we've passed spring in 2022. There was this threshold. Now we're at this point where it's like, oh, we need to find our allies and we have these trials or tests that we have before we can go through the initiation. And so that makes a lot of sense with like a lot of the rhetoric that you hear people, well, you're on the wrong side of X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, really? The fact that I'm questioning something puts me on a side? I don't think so, but it says a lot about where you're at, I guess. Um, and so yeah, you see a lot of that going on right now, and okay, makes a lot of sense because that's kind of the point where we're at in this cycle of latitude cycle of Mars. Like people are really feeling like this, you're either with me or you're against me, man, It's like, yeah, I'm Switzerland, bruh. I ain't trying to be with you or against you. Um, and yeah, that means I guess that means I'm not your ally, and so you need to keep looking. But it does certainly doesn't mean I'm your enemy either. And with the Venus loop, we are up here in the middle of the cycle. We're at this loop between the Aries and we're again at the north bending of her cycle, where um, she reaches the maximum northern latitude, and so that means that literally if you go far enough north, you might be able to experience Venus continuously from the previous cycle, which was the Leo cycle, into the Aries cycle, from evening star to morning star without an interruption, without her being invisible. That's pretty remarkable. I don't think I'm going to be able to do that here in Virginia, but the fact that it's possible really speaks to the fact that this loop might be very different than, for instance, the last one that we went through, which was a deep southern loop. You see what I'm saying? There's a different kind of experience that is being offered here. So we're going to return to Morpheus before we wrap this up, and I'm going to offer you the idea that there really is no blue pill. Ignorance is not bliss. You can't unsee reality once you've seen it, and yeah, you can sort of ignore it, um, but generally speaking, that's going to come at a cost, and I think that in the astrology world, pop astrology is great. I'm not denigrating pop astrology at all. I think it's great. It serves a purpose of like, getting it out to the masses. We definitely need that. And um, but there should be an understanding that, hey, like keep going, like there's another level and there's another level and there's another level. And ideally, maybe we should all be working together and saying, hey, like this is not the end of the journey, dude. This is just the beginning of the journey. And if you really wanna, you know, keep going, here's a list of people I recommend you to read and to explore. And that's kind of the way that I've always operated. That, it's a that there's a that this is a continuous um journey of discovery and exploration. Like I'm gonna be discovering stuff and learning until the day I die. I really hope that. Yeah, I might get lazy and mostly retire at some point, but I don't think I'm ever gonna stop. I really hope not. And so I think we really owe it to ourselves if we're going to be stewards of this great art to always be hungry for that red pill, and to stop growing and to stop. There's no blue pill to stop growing and to stop exploring and to stop. Um, it's not it's not a blue pill. It's actually stagnation, and stagnation can lead to um, unhealthy situation. So that's not the ignorance is not bliss by no means. And so, that's why I keep trying to share this more advanced information with people because I'm hoping that, they'll develop that hunger for keeping going, keeping red pilling themselves. You don't take the red pill once. You got to keep taking it over and over and over again. All right, so here's the point where I invite you all to come visit me at dreamastrologer.com. Um, I've got I recently actually raised my rates on consultations because my God, man, inflation is so crazy. I was just unfortunately had to get some sympathy cards for some people the other day and like just checking out. It's like, my God, it's $5 for a card. Um, I feel like those old people when I was a kid, they're, boy, I remember when gas was 10 cents a gallon. I remember when greeting cards were like $1 or something. Um, so I raised my prices on consults, and I warned people well in advance. So a lot of people came, and that was great. But I decided I'm actually going to lower my rates on my introductory level of my memberships. So the good news is that if you want to take part in my auspicious elections report that I put out every month, which by the way comes along with it's basically a full primer on astrological magic. So it covers the theory and the techniques and provides you with six different kinds of elections. So we have planetary, we have decan, we have fixed stars, we have constellations, we have um, lunar mansions and house-based elections. Um, and all that for $10. I mean, it's a really great deal. I had somebody on Twitter X recently who was a fellow Virgo, and it's always nice to get Virgo appreciation. She was like, "My God, so detailed, and you've got links and all this stuff. It's incredible." And I was like, "Oh man, it's so great to hear." So, yeah, I mean, it's something that I love to do, and I figure, what the hell, the more the merrier. There's also other levels where you can, I've been doing this for, just as a full-time professional now. What? Let's see, about 18 years as a full-time professional, all over the world. I've got dozens and dozens of recordings of lectures and the articles that I mentioned on these retrograde loops, and there's a whole like folder on just this material. There's a whole folder on Venus, there's a whole folder on Mercury, blah blah blah. That's kind of like the next level of membership. And then if you want to consult with me on a regular basis, whether that be, just people who like to get, three or so readings a year, there's a discounted rate for that, and it's worth it. If you want to work with me on a more regular basis to kind of dive into a particular area of study, um, that's also available with the highest level of membership. And so I invite people to check that out. I'm going to be in Spain doing some teachings with Olga Hueso and Adam Gainsbourg, and looking forward to that. So I'm going to be kind of, not super available in late March, early April. But then when I get back, I'll be doing some more podcasting. Sylvia and I are doing a new series on Substack that I'm calling the Bohemian Bulletin, which are the written posts, and the Bohemian broadcast, which is when she and I get to do a podcast together about the Bohemian stars each month. So, and we're going to be pre-recording one to release while I'm gone. So there'll be some continuity there. So check that out. And yeah, open your mind to the idea of the retrograde process being an adventure. It might not be a fun adventure. It might not always be a fun adventure. Look, I'm not romanticizing this stuff, but in any experience, there's always like lessons and learning, and sometimes it's the hard lessons that really are the most valuable, you know? So that's what I hope people take away from this. And I'll keep bringing us back to this idea. So if you're like, holy crap, Gary, that's way too much for me to take in all at once, don't worry. I'm going to be keep visiting as we go through the other retrogrades. Um, I'm going to keep visiting this topic, and eventually, hopefully it'll start to be something that people, I just had a follower. She's been with me for years. She was with me at some of the sky astrology conferences, and she goes, "Hey, is this true? Somebody had posted that Venus will not be invisible during the cycle." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty much, if you're far enough north, it's pretty much true." I was like, because she's so far north in latitude, and she's like, "Oh, that's why you keep harping on this latitude stuff so much." And I'm like, thumbs up. Yes, that's exactly why. Like, because it has very important ramifications. Um, so yeah, it's a journey. Don't expect to I mean, it took me a long time to put all this together. And so don't expect to for it all to come together all at once, but I think it is a journey well worth taking. And that if we begin to embrace, Carl Jung said that the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering, right? And the thing is, we don't even know that the retrograde's going to be suffering. But if we assume it is, and we go, don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other, right? Well, by trying to avoid potential suffering, we're avoiding life, and that's not a healthy attitude, actually. Like embracing it, and like by embracing it, we might actually have a more easy time. We might find that, wow, this was actually a welcome break from normal. But even if that's not the case, by embracing it, we're much more likely to receive the needed outside of normal information that's going to help us to grow. So all right, thanks for joining me once again. And until next time, enjoy the retrograde adventures. Bye for now.